Hey, aloha, y'all. Daniel Aaron with you, and I am continuing on this series. And I said 30, but it's going to be more than 30. So I'll just say this numberless series of my reverential thanking of my coaches, teachers, mentors, or more accurately, some of them, because there's too many. And in part, the impetus for this is me sort of coming out of the closet, and for the first time since my ordination 31 years ago, using the title Reverend, which to me is all about reverence, right? And that's part of where the word comes from. And it's reverence for spirit, for life force, and in this particular case, reverence for the amazing, amazing teachers who have helped me become who I am. And this is ironic in this one, in that, okay, well, one, it's Mother's Day, so it's not ironic, it's fitting. Two, it's ironic though, or weird, I don't know what the word is for me. In the last few days, I've spoken about two of my mentors who were both women and who were, I think, the only two people I've known that have given to me unconditional love, which is, of course, part of what made them such important and powerful mentors in my life. And so as I reflected on, well, what would I love to share with you about my biological mother? That was weird. I don't have a adopted mother either, but I guess those other women were in some way mother figures for me. What would I love to share with you? Well, it's not that she gave me unconditional love. I'm sure she wanted to, but she didn't. She didn't have that understanding or ability for that. And my mother was an amazing, complex woman. She was strong, and she was quirky, and she was charming, um, and she also came from a background that had a lot of pain in it, right? And she didn't know how to handle that pain herself. And I think in many ways, she never learned to love herself. And so she was never able to really receive love. And she was one of my greatest teachers on that level because um, I really wanted to to love her and to for her to feel love. I guess more accurately, I did love her. I wanted her to feel that. I wanted her to be happy and fulfilled. And yet my experience on some level was that as much as I did, and I could have done so much more. I know now from adult retrospection, um, I was I was a kid, right, and I was focused on myself, like as kids are, and as appropriate to a certain degree. But part of what I learned, and it took many many years, and other teachers and other therapists, was that if somebody is not able to love themselves, nobody else can really love them in a way that will feel fulfilling. In some ways, the metaphor for me is she was like a bucket with the bottom missing. And that meant that whatever me or anyone else poured in, it went through. And while that was painful and challenging and led to many lessons and much growth for me, it also taught me a lot about the importance of self love, something about which I am still learning. I'm still learning to love myself more fully and to let go of judgments and criticisms I have about myself wherever I took them on. And so I'm grateful to my mom for that. I'm also grateful to her for her power and her strength. She was, I was born in 1969, and I was the fifth child of my mother. 8 years gap between me and my sister Casey, and so I was, you could say, an accident. Although there's another story and myth around that, which I won't get into at this point. Maybe we'll get to that with my father. And so my mother was already, right, she was already on her way out of her marriage with her alcoholic husband, my father. And her children were all in school now, and she was going back to college herself. She was one of those, perfect alimony cases where she, you know, was going to university but stopped and became a full-time mother, and supported my father to go through his graduate education. So at this point, when I was born, she was getting her feet back underneath her. She was going out into the world. And guess what? It was right at the magical, amazing time of the women's liberation movement, or the Equal Rights Amendment, right? Which was a big turning point, a big step for the whole world in civil rights of all sorts, and specifically around feminism. And my mother not only sort of got into that, rode the wave, she became a leader in that world. She became a leader in the Equal Rights Amendment movement, and working for the government, and supporting equal rights, supporting feminism, which, as you can imagine, had some pros and cons for me. And as this is an homage to her, I say the pros are I learned a lot about inequity. I learned a lot about not just the way our society was, and of course, in many ways still is, sexist. That brought me to a greater understanding of racism, and eventually speciesism, and all of the isms, which is why one of my declarations I um, speak out and write out daily is that I am a voice, inspiration, and catalyst for the end of isms and the birth of freedom, love, and respect for all beings. And I'm really so grateful to my mother, because it was her advocacy specifically for women, and her education around the ways sexism had negatively impacted women, that gave me so much more understanding of isms, of inequity, and it also gave me a much greater understanding of women, for which I'm really grateful. So she was strong. I remember one of my favorite stories from her. I don't know if favorite's the right word. A story that left a big impression on me is that she told me about one time my father had been drinking, and they were a young couple in the late 50s, and it was a different era. And at that point, the idea of men hitting their wives was, if not cool and not accepted, it was more common. And there was one night where my father had been drinking, and they were having an argument, and I don't remember the exact detail, but the basis of it was that he at some point like raised his hand like he was going to hit her. And the way she described it, I can totally imagine, because I experienced her ferocity as well. She rose up and said, "If you ever hit me, it'll be the last thing you ever do in this marriage." And her clarity and power in that lowered my father's hand, and as many problems as he created in our family, largely through his alcoholism, physical violence was not one that ever came from him. And again, we'll leave other talks about violence aside for another time. Um, I remember my mother had on the refrigerator a magnet, and it said, "When you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on." And that really spoke to her value of resilience. Like, we'll find a way, we'll get through this, which, some sadness in me, because part of what that meant for her was just surviving. She hadn't learned that pain in the family can be healed and resolved, and she hadn't learned that dysfunctions are not to be tolerated, that we can find ways of overcoming them. In fact, find that those become the seeds of greater things in our life. Yet, way better to have resilience, if not anti-fragility, better to have resilience than to become helpless. And that's part of what she taught me as well. One more thing I'll share with you about her. There wasn't a magnet, it was a pin. Like, I don't know if we don't do that anymore, really, like pins that we used to wear here, little metal things with sayings on them. She had one that was stuck on a lamp, always on her desk. She had this beautiful antique desk that she never used, but it was beautiful. And the lamp that was up there had this pin stuck in it, and it said, "Shoot for the moon. That way, if you miss, you'll be among the stars." I almost remember who said that. Holmes? Anyway, and that stuck with me. And I can look even in my own astrological birth chart and know, yeah, actually, I'm wired for that. But there's something powerful about allowing our imagination to aim high. I love the Goethe quotation about commitment on that level. Like whatever you can do or believe you can, go for it. I'm shortening and paraphrasing. So, my mother, in addition to her challenges and her strength, she was a very charming and clever woman. She had that philosophy of shoot for the moon, however, didn't apply it to herself. She was stuck, maybe she was because she was born during the Depression, 1933, really stuck in a survival mindset. And of course, I'm grateful for that on some level because that's part of what allowed her to always provide for me, right, as a boy. Um, it also, in some way, kept her from applying that pin wisdom in her own life, shooting for the moon. And she always kind of did what she thought she had to do. And yet, in the last stage of her life, when she'd finally retired from her government job and she'd had all these series of medical issues, she finally gave herself the permission to write. And she wrote a play at that point and got it produced. And while it was community theater and it wasn't up to her potential or up to her fantasies, it was some level of fulfillment for her. And so I'm super happy for her on that level. Right? My mother was an amazing woman who taught me to be resilient, to go for dreams, to speak up for what I want in the world, what I see in the world, whether that's to say when something's not right or to praise somebody for their service when they do a great job. Right? She taught me that anything is possible, even if she hadn't lived it fully herself. Super grateful to her. And of course, simple fact that she gave me life is an amazing gift. Enough said on that. I will leave it there. Y'all, thank you for tuning in. There's more about my reverential coming out of the closet in the comments. And if I can be of any assistance to you, if you would like to create anything more in your life, let's talk. That's the juice. That's fun. Thanks, y'all.